Firstly, can everybody hear me if I don't use the mic?
Should we shuffle forward, guys?
It would be great, yeah, shuffle forward a bit.
Not so many others here.
Right away.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Nick's one of my favourite speakers. I'm glad you've got a one-to-one.
Oh. Yeah, face off between Dr. Rock and Santos Bonacci.
Yeah, I know. I don't worry, Nick. I'm going to see Santos in London on Saturday.
It'll all be on the web anyway. Well, I'm really looking forward to doing this talk here, because this is, if you like, a real synthesis of the work I've been doing really for nearly 20 years now. We're talking about ceremony, healing and the end of a world age. I spoke about the physical nature of the end of a world age when I talked on Friday, I think it was. So we won't be touching that. What I want to talk about is the end of the world age for us. And we're going to be talking about some of the signs of the end of the world age, first of all, in our society. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about a ceremony called the Ceremony of Original Innocence, which is something I discovered a couple of decades ago and I worked with intently for 10 years. It has been the single most magical thing that I've ever done for myself. It involves geometry, it involves manipulation of DNA by alien races and all of that. So that gives us a real nice bit of variety. I'm going to explain what the ceremony's like and what would happen if you come to a day facilitated by any of the ambassadors, but especially me and Jess. Obviously I recommend us because I'm doing the talk. If not and you like the sound of it, then somebody can get the gaming tokens together to have a CD that's got it all on, so you can do it again and again in your sitting room. So that's going to be that's the main aim of the first half of the talk, is to talk about that ceremony, how it works, what it does, and how we prove to you that it has been done. The second half of the talk, I want to ask the question whether we already know that people were around during catastrophic times in the past because they wrote about it and because they put petroglyphs about it. Again, we saw about that on Friday. What I want to look at in the second half of the talk is whether the ancients left any messages for us, whether there's information, as we know their buildings survived, we've seen that, but was any information being put forward to the current age? I want to see if there's evidence for elder races knowing about these changing times and trying to let us know about them. We talk a little bit about prophecy and intent and common unity, about how important it is for the human energetic being to be properly engaged and awake at the moment in what it's doing and not asleep at the wheel. And at the very end of the talk I shall slip into a few lines of very, very beautiful poetry which are based on some Welsh bardic poetry by a character called Taliesin. And I think more than anything else, those last 10 or 12 lines of the talk are going to sum up what it is that I'm trying to get at. So as usual, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride. You can tell I've got plenty of stuff to get through, as is normally the case. The ceremony that this material is based on is fundamentally optimistic, and thousands of people have now been reconnected by this technology, basically having your electromagnetic internal circuitry reconnected to the elemental heart of creation. We did once do a TruthJuice ceremony, TruthJuice Nottingham, TruthJuice Leicester and TruthJuice Birmingham, I think it was. We had 33 people turn up and we had a really wild day. But before I get into that, because it is the most woo-woo stuff I do, dealing with the energetic body and stuff isn't normally my field, it's only my depth of experience with this particular technology that enables me to do that. But just for people who haven't come across me and don't know who I am, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the world and the no-fit state as I understand it. Partly just to show that I'm not simply engaged in woo-woo, as I say, but also because at the ends of ages it is said that men forget why they are here. They forget gratitude, they forget reciprocity, and they behave as if all were not born equal in the eyes of the Creator. This is how the end of previous suns and previous world ages have been described. I just wish to investigate briefly at the beginning how it is that that applies to the world that we live in. It will be a good revision course for everybody in this tent, I reckon, but to some of the straighter world who hear this, these next few slides come as a real shock. We know that money is created through debt. It's now on the record. Just 2 or 3 years ago it really was simply a matter of private correspondence, but confirmation can now be found in recent Bank of England quarterly bulletins and in the Deutsche Bank, who've made similar statements. Also, I was only yesterday reading a review for a book called Death Grip, which tells this whole story in a book, and I hope it sells really well. Look it up, give it to people. It's the whole story, really well written. We know that an invisible hand takes the credit that's created by we the people, and this invisible hand steals it and then requires repayment at interest. And interest is a gamble. Some of you are going to walk away naked, some of you are going to walk away with oodles of pounds. It just depends who's holding the promissory tokens when the music stops. Cash money is published by private corporations such as the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve only to cover the purported loan, not the interest. They never publish the interest. That means the difference between what is published and what is allegedly owed must be taken in the form of goods and services. And ultimately, because all money is created out of thin air, the World Management Team will claim all goods and services in repayment of an illusory debt. And the debt of one person can only be repaid if at least an equal obligation is taken on by another individual. And the total's loan must, per force and constantly, increase to cover even the interest on this inevitably burgeoning debt. So we have a common destiny. With increasing frequency, those who do not hold any debt tokens when the music stops lose all to which they believe they had title. Their job, their car, their dwelling, their family, and quite often every visible means of support. We know that most and maybe all of our mortgages raised since 1989 and probably before have been both illegal and unlawful. We know that the cash to repay the interest on these fraudulent instruments also, of course, remains unpublished, and that's a lot of interest. 140 grand over 100 grand at 25% over 7% over 25 years. £140,000 not published, which is going to have to be taken off the likes of you and I. We also know, and this is great, by executing a mortgage deed, we the people give an irrevocable right of attorney to the mortgage provider. Yes. This enables them to create negotiable instruments in the name of the mortgagee, and the mortgagee is liable for these instruments created without his or her knowledge, and we're led to believe that this is all secured on the property, when in fact it's secured on the note. We're
secured on the what?
What?
I didn't hear the last word. Secured on
Secured on the loan note.
On the
it's
loan
actually
note.
Secured on the document, not
yes.
on the bricks and mortar. Taxes. We're aware now that tax paid on the sweat of our brow, income tax as it's called, has no basis in law. It's entirely voluntary. And in fact, I heard an Irish politician say on mainstream television the other day, he said all taxes are voluntary. I bet we'll be taking a whipping for that one. We also know that by far the larger portion of all taxes paid, and this includes council tax, income tax, road tax, gaming tax, whichever one, tax on alcohol, go directly to the International Bank of Settlements via the World Bank and the IMF. And they're going there, all these funds, to service interest on a debt generated by an entirely parasitical fiscal system. It is designed to collapse. It cannot work. Even 1% of interest over the length of time we're talking about will destroy economies. So, and the other thing it goes to, apart from repaying a debt which isn't ours and can never be repaid for reasons already explained, the remainder of it goes to fight foreign wars. So your council tax, far from building and maintaining services, infrastructure and roads, as we are so frequently told, these payments are simply used to pay off a debt that was never ours and to destroy the amenities and livelihoods of our brothers and our sisters in not so distant lands. This is why it is unlawful to pay tax, voluntary and unlawful. We know that the banks are, it appears now with official sanction, all of them laundering criminal funds and fixing interest rates, including those on the illegal mortgages, whilst we the people are evicted from family homes, allegedly for failing to perform on what is in perhaps all cases a demonstrably unenforceable contract. And for every gaming token that is spent by we the people, the banking system makes 10 times that amount through the fractional reservation of deposits, and then of course it carries on selling your notes and your cheques and your paying in slips forever on afterwards and makes even more out of that. And despite all of that, they ran out of money and they had to be bailed out, apparently with funds from elsewhere. We have to be men of the sea to know that bailing out is nothing better than a very temporary solution. You know, if you find yourself bailing out, you're pretty close to shark food, and just bailing out is not going to do you any good, even if bailing out is what you're genuinely doing. And taxes and interest are not the only charges that are governing our individual lives. An increasing number of folk are experiencing men and women in a uniform style of dress, offering a service in exchange for something of value. The service could be anything from notice of a fixed penalty fine to time spent being housed, fed and administered by private corporations in the pay of the no-fit state. The thing of value being sought in exchange for this service fundamentally is the consent of a person to the service offered. And it is that simple. All they can do is offer you a contract. And it's by accepting the contracts that we're getting ourselves into so much trouble. And nowadays we also know that the one-time upholder of the public peace, the policeman, has also become a creature of the corporations, working for and raising funds on behalf of not the betterment of our roads, but shareholders and a board of directors. The health service that we're landed with appears to nowadays, it's got excellent people at the front of it, like so many of these projects. The people on the ground are working really hard. Nonetheless, the overall effect of the NHS is now, I think, quite often acknowledged again even by government, to be simply enabling people to live with their symptoms rather than healing and informing the individual. Healing and informing individuals is what they are definitely not about. Helping to heal and inform individuals is definitely what I'm about, especially this afternoon. They seem to want to create and support a clientele that requires cradle-to-grave examination and intervention. All the treatment, all the apparatus, all of the research and all the management are all sponsored and informed by corporate interests. And alternative methods that many of us know to be effective because we've seen them working on people are suppressed and the professional credibility of pioneers extinguished wherever possible. I'm not going to do the chemtrails, and I'm not going to do the biological weapons. And I'm not going to spend too much time looking at that, because that's a list that's called FBI. It's an FBI list of what terrorists are. Things like no license plate, no driver's license, refusal to identify yourself. You know, you're going to be telling me next I don't have the right to remain silent. You know, this is an amazing list of stuff. But I could go on, and as people know, I frequently do. There's simply those, the first subjects that came to the tip of an iceberg. Each of us here, I know, could come up with our own list of woes, injustices and frauds, because that's pretty much all we see around us. And what difference, we might reasonably ask, can an individual make when faced with such a sea of obvious insanity? And it's my opinion, having encountered the ceremony and many other interesting technologies, some of which we will touch on, that perhaps the solution does not entirely lie at the level of the problem. Actually trying to deal with the money and the tax man and all that kind of stuff. By paying attention to it even, we're adding fuel to the fire. What would happen if we were to try and make energetic progress in another direction entirely? And I concluded a long time ago that a complex system is most effectively stalled by informed individual and independent action, because it's extremely difficult to predict what's going to happen on that kind of basis. That's exactly what we're seeing at the moment. Thousands, maybe now tens of thousands of people doing their own thing to try and result in some kind of a more effective response, some kind of remedy, we might say. Such a thing is done even more effectively when it's challenged by a multitude of such actions, so as several of us start working together. And I also like to ask whether there might be more to this than simply the withdrawal of our consent, because that's what we're talking about. We're no longer going to consent to the contract. I'm happy with the contract as it stands, and wander off, say nothing and just walk away. Might the withdrawal of consent itself have effects over and above those apparent in the reactions of our earthbound and distinctly shady administration? So what I'm asking is whether actually taking these moves, which many of us, if we're not forced to, will do eventually anyway, whether that makes a difference to our spiritual well-being, whether it makes a difference to the energetic layer that surrounds us, because it's known that we are so much more than just the physical being. The manifestation of consciousness is an extremely mysterious subject and something we can't go into in any detail. It's really a subject all of a talk all on its own, perhaps one day. I'd just like to mention Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field, his idea that there is a kind of a shared field of experience around us that has arisen as a result of the experience of our entire race in all of our time on this planet, and that we have, under some circumstances, direct access to that field. He also suggests that the emotional and spiritual body grows towards a goal or form which is embedded in the quantum sea of potential, that we're being drawn into a future. This is perhaps best, it's a difficult idea to grasp, but I remember reading once that salamanders' eggs, unfertilised salamanders' eggs, have been found to contain around them the electromagnetic field that is shaped like a fully grown salamander. So that salamander, in some sense, even before the egg is fertilised, has this kind of morphic imprint which trains it to know what to do. It's how the birds know how to sing. It's how we know how to walk, apart from by imitation. Is by access to all the many people who've learned how to sing and walk before. We found out that the human neocortex, which is one of the newest parts of our brain, is specifically attuned to receive light and magnetic information of one sort or another. It's made their little sacks of liquid crystal, the most coherent stuff that we've come across yet. I was reading recently on an item on biogeometry that people have started experimenting with simply putting the right bits of perspex geometry around telephone masts, and are successfully turning them not only sometimes into things that don't do any obvious harm, and apparently they're starting to see results which suggest that we might even be able to make them beneficial. Now imagine that. Imagine if we could go and turn all of those things into something that's actually beneficial for consciousness. We're sensitive to electromagnetic radiation. Sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation and light, and the changing quality of light at this particular time, is absolutely central to the ceremony material. Everything is being drawn forward by a strange attractor of some sort. That's what this is a picture of. It's a picture of a strange attractor. Even the galaxy itself is slowly but surely whirling with all the other galaxies towards a strange attractor beyond the edge of time, which is lying buried in the biggest thing visible to humanity, which is a wall of stars and galaxy at the edge of our kind of optical abilities. Spells, individual communication of ideas and action, they're all very difficult things. Words are simply a means of capturing certain aspects of the essence of a thing without, of necessity, catching the essence itself. And the way we use language affects others as surely as the spells of society affect each of us. And the greatest gift we have to offer the world, perhaps the only gift, is our own transformation. This is a transformational technology. It's important to remember that everything we say echoes not only through the people who are hearing it, but through their friends and their friends' friends. It goes 2 layers beyond the people you even know to people you don't know and probably won't even meet. English is basically a tool for deception. The Roman language, Latin, very easy. They had little special endings at the end of all the verbs and the nouns to tell you not only which was the verb and which was the noun, but who was doing precisely what, and with which, and to whom. You don't have to use English like that. English is deliberately designed to be slippery and misleading and misdirecting. We can be thankful that from all of that comes, of course, our fantastic humour. English is a very funny language because we've got all of these puns, we've got all these double spellings, all these other things, but fundamentally it's a means to manipulate you, it's a means to build the world that you believe, that you see around you. And the template ceremonies, especially this first one, maintain that just as our language and societal structure have been used to guide and modify all aspects of human behaviour, certain energetic changes to the electromagnetic systems of humankind have acted as a foundation on which all subsequent misdirection has been built. Somewhere on a planet not far away from here, not perhaps so long ago, somebody was going to make sure that we were no longer energetically connected to earth, air, fire, water and ether, and that disconnection is exactly what we're dealing with it now. They believe, I think they're taking the final spanner to it. You can reconnect yourself straight away and permanently simply with the DVD or by joining in a ceremony somewhere. It's really spectacular. The rationale of the ceremony of original innocence, it's a set of electromagnetic circuits that are interpenetrating and interrelying, so every time you reconnect another circuit it strengthens all the others. I'm really only interested in talking about the first ceremony, which connects the first 12 circuits, because that's the only one that's had a CD released for it so far, so it's widely accessible to people easily. But at the same time, we, like I say, will come along and facilitate it if people prefer the human from the technical approach. There are people I know in the tent who've experienced our ceremony days. Human body contains meridian systems pretty much the same as are described by Chinese acupuncture and the rest. But with this particular technology, they're piled together. They're in big bundles. They're really strong electromagnetic mains cables made up of bundles of meridians that run through your chakras. And certain bundles of these meridians form electromagnetic circuits that are resonant with the frequencies of crystal, fire, geometric form, our own eyes in a mirror, and our own internal sun when we close our eyes and imagine that. We know this to be the case because there's a series of test points on the body which I will show you, and we use muscle testing to show that these circuits can be weak when you're not looking at one of these items, and they become strong when you do. So we can, it's basically a resonance between you and the outside world, between you and maybe your own eyes, but you and fire, you and geometric form. When we talk about earth in this ceremony, we can either look at an earth crystal, or we can look at a cube, which is the Platonic symbol for it. I want to say a bit about resonance as well, because resonance is a word, and resonance and resonant are words that get used a lot. It's a really, really crucial subject as far as we're concerned, because it means the transmission of ideas through intervening space, really, and everything is a frequency, and resonance is when frequencies come together to form a different frequency, or one that is bigger than both put together. I always thought the best illustration I heard of what resonance is to imagine you've got a tuning fork that's tuned to the letter A, then imagine you've got a yurt full of, I don't know, singing bowls, tuning forks, other resonant things, piano wires, that kind of thing. And that you ring your tuning fork in there, then everything that's in there tuned to A will start ringing as well. You don't hear the sound, you don't kind of see the sound moving across the space, but everything resonates. It destroys everything from kidney stones to suspension bridges. Anyone seen any of those old films of a standing wave setting up on a suspension bridge? Might be because some cows, or there's too much weight standing on it still, it starts to wave. And once it gets into it, there's nothing anybody can do. They can just tear themselves apart, especially if there's a bit of wind. The kidney stones, ultrasound, they vibrate your kidney stones to small pieces, very small pieces, so they're easier to pass. Light, of course, is a higher frequency transmission than any of these things, than sound or than ultrasound. But our energetic systems are responsive to resonance on these higher frequencies, just as sensitive, in fact, as the bowls are responsive to sound. And items in the manifest world can be combined with these using muscle testing to see just exactly what it is you're resonant with. You can play this game with your Buddhas, with unicorns and all manner of things. Very interesting system. So the specific test points are connected with the elements. They're not in quite the order I'd put them in there. We've got water on the end, which is an icosahedron, earth seconding from the right, which is a cube, dodecahedron, which is ether, octahedron, which is air or prana, and the tetrahedron, which is fire. And the circuits that we reconnect, the fire circuits in the perineum, stand on its own and is strengthened by fire. Well, we'll go by what they're strengthened through in a minute. That's the fire circuit. Water circuits are where the ribs meet, the creative process, the xiphoid, and most importantly the thymus, which is like a little hologram of the whole system. By reconnecting the thymus to a certain extent, we do the job of the whole system. The air circuits, unsurprisingly, are the throat, third eye, crown, and there's another one about 4 inches in the air, which is the bloody hell, would you believe it slipped my mind, auric chakra, the auric circuit, that's it. The earth circuit is reconnected. It's the only circuit of its kind, and it's reconnected about 2 inches above where the spinal column goes into the head. And the ether circuits, perhaps the ones out of which all the others are made manifest, are at the solar plexus, the heart, and the tip of the pubic bone. That gives you 12 circuits, all of which we're going to be dealing with. Kinesiology, as I say, can be used. I might do a bit of this outside later if we have a bit of time. On the day of the ceremony, and all of the materials kind of available, but there's little booklets and CDs to watch and things. On the days that we run a brief intro to the energetic structure of matter and the cosmos itself, because the introduction to the ceremony uses a lot of words that many people will be familiar with, but also quite a lot that people won't be. So before I do that introduction, I like to do an intro to the intro, to explain how it is that our energetic structure interrelates with the energetic nature of the cosmos, and then do a bit of an introduction that was related to us 15 years ago by Juliet Carter, who's the lady who's responsible for writing it and bringing the geometry through and stuff. And it's really still one of the most beautiful pieces of writing I've ever come across. It thrills me every time I get to read it, and it's exactly as it was, word for word, delivered to us without notes in Glastonbury when we first came across it. It's really at once comforting and disturbing. It really is a serious roller coaster ride, but even, like I say, after 1.5 decades, I still enjoy it every time I encounter it. And even though it became the first of many ceremonies, this introduction contains the seed of the whole thing. All of the information that came out later is kind of contained within this intro. It was once 5 ceremonies: water, air, earth, fire and ether. When we first came across it, it had become 1 ceremony, making it a lot swifter and easier. There are other ceremonies which we don't have time to look into here, but I'm happy to talk to people about afterwards. I think that this first one really is critical though, because of the job it's doing in undoing what's been done to us. Progressively the other ceremonies do the same job over more and more circuits. The ceremony itself is a really beautiful experience. After this big work up in the day with volunteer, we muscle test everybody to show what weakness is like, use props to show them what it'd be like to feel strong. We muscle test everybody after the ceremony to show that they're permanently reconnected, which they always are, even if they've been asleep through the whole thing. The ceremony itself, after all of this, is a really beautiful thing, and almost inevitably I find that people tell me afterwards that they felt that they were saying words that they'd always longed to say. Something I still feel about it, once again, even though I must have done it. I've done it dozens of times now for people in various places. Specific test points I just showed you. These, oh, thank you very much. Oh yes, my computer was a bit slow there. What we do is, in the ceremony itself, there's 5 bits of the ceremony. There's a little bit of meditation on the water circuits to start with, and then in the ceremony that we run, we look at our own eyes in a mirror. When you use the video, you'll use entirely geometry, probably geometry on the screen, some of which we'll see. So you'd use an icosahedron to reconnect the water circuits, or looking into your own eyes. You repeat some we repeat some simple but beautiful words whilst looking into a mirror or at a flame or whatever, and the circuit becomes permanently reconnected as a result of speaking the words. It really is quite uncanny. Like I say, it's demonstrable, and it's not failed any of the people who are doing it. I still find myself getting a bit uneasy, you know, when it comes to time to do the muscle testing, because it seems a bit weird even to me, and I've been experiencing it for a decade and a half. But and like I said before, we've had people sleep through the whole thing. We've done it in languages that people don't understand, and it still works. Really, seriously, we've had a man who slept through the whole thing, the whole presentation and the whole ceremony. He only woke up for lunch, didn't he?
Was there, yeah.
And at the end of it, his muscles were as strong, his circuits were as strong as anybody else's. So that's what I mean by resonant, okay? The other very strange thing about it, which really does show that you're dealing with something very odd, because this even worked on my dad, who was a right cynical old git when it comes to these things, is that you can surrogate for people in your own bloodline with their permission. You can surrogate for dead people as much as you like, but children, if they're over the age of 16, you need their permission. If not, you can reconnect them anyway. Your mum, your dad, anybody you've got a blood relationship. And I tested it on my dad. My mum came to the ceremonies. I said, get his permission to surrogate. Tested all his circuits before my mum came, and he was weak as a kitten. Tested all his circuits some 3 or 4 weeks after my mum came to the ceremony, and he was really strong. And I tell you, I've seen a lot of people look surprised with the muscle testing, but nobody is surprised as my dad. Okay, so I want to look at some of the geometry to give you some idea of what we're dealing with. This is the piece of geometry which in the video reconnects the fire circuit. We spin them because we feel that when they're still, it's pretty much like a photograph, and this catches more of the moving spirit of the thing. The geometries get more complicated as we build up. Sorry about the rudimentary filming, it's a bit of an experimental project, it will improve over time. This was to reconnect the fire circuit, which you remember is in the perineum, in the root chakra basically. And it's reconnected by looking at either a flame on a candle or in a tetrahedron, which means that Plato was right. Tetrahedrons are associated with fire, so we're proving his ideas as well using this muscle testing. Cubes, earth circuit, middle of the back of the head, a couple of inches above where the spine enters the brain. It's reconnected by looking at a cube, such as this on the screen, or at earth crystals. We play some interesting tricks with crystals that aren't from earth in the muscle testing, but that is a cube. Just by looking at that, your earth circuit is being reconnected, by the way. When you look away, it becomes disconnected again. It's a bit like a flickering light bulb, you're just not quite being plugged in. What this ceremony does is reconnects you to the matrix, as it were. Reconnection of the earth circuit establishes the beginnings of a mycelium of earth awareness in the human, and human awareness in the earth. Octahedron, associated with the air circuits, so it's associated with air and prana, so not only the metabolization of breath, but the metabolization of all subtle energies in the system. There's 4 of the air circuits: throat, third eye, crown, and the auric. It's reconnected by looking into your own eyes in a mirror, by looking at an octahedron, or if you come to the ceremony with a partner, you can look into your partner's eyes, and that works too. Very strange, eh? Next set of circuits, the water circuits. These are the first ones that are reconnected in the ceremony. They're reconnected once again looking into a mirror or into your partner's eyes, or looking at an octahedron. And these water circuits, this was the first part of this ceremony that came through, so it's the bit that's being done for longest, and it addresses directly, and this is one of the most common bits of feedback we get, it addresses directly levels of fear, anger and jealousy. It really does make life a lot easier for a lot of people. Sometimes it takes a while to unfold, but it does work. This is the sign for ether, the dodecahedron. They were the pubic circuits, solar plexus and the heart, so there's 3 circuits in that little ceremony. It's reconnected by imagining one's own internal sun or looking at a dodecahedron. Close your eyes, look at your own sun. We've also got a piece of geometry that we can use for that now. And this particular one's really spectacular. It reconnects our dormant electromagnetic self to our solar and galactic field. So it reconnects us to the mind of light in the sun and the mind of light beyond the sun at the heart of the galaxy. These water circuits are most often disconnected during conception, gestation, birth or childhood. The remaining circuits were all disconnected by genetic manipulation, said to have been disconnected a long time ago in humanity's past. But as I say, demonstrably this ceremony reconnects these circuits permanently. We occasionally come across people in fields 5 or 6 years later, can't remember which ceremonies they've done, and by testing their circuits, finding out what level the weakness starts at, we can tell how far they got. One of the reasons I really like it is because it's fundamentally you are reconnecting yourself to earth, air, fire, water and ether. At the time I did this first ceremony, I was more or less properly disconnected from all of those things. I very rarely walked barefoot on the grass or barefoot on the earth. The places where I lived were all being turned into tarmac for putting cars on anyway. We know that the air we're breathing is compromised, and so is the tap water. So it was that the kind of, if you like, the electromagnetic disconnection was kind of echoed in my physical life. And one of the first things I noticed happening after doing the ceremony was my urge to spend more time actually looking at fire, something we all love to do, or looking at crystals and the like, started to grow stronger, and having them around me really helped as well. So in a way I really do feel there's a physical reconnection being made. Another really important thing is that it's one of the most effective ways of reducing fear levels. And in all the many branches of work that I've come across in the sort of TruthJuice scope, all the people that I've spoken to, every single one of them shares as a first piece of advice that what we need to do is drop the fear. We need to be able to do something about our levels of fear, because it's as a result of that many of the things around us are manifesting. And to keep us in a state of fear and stress, just as Dave was explaining in his subliminals talk, is one of the main aims of the world management team. So anything that can help you feel more relaxed is a good idea, and it's the prime benefit, I reckon, if there is one, of the ceremony of original innocence, is that. Another thing it does is it sorts out distribution of power in personal relationships. This can be within personal relationships at home, personal relationships at work. People can find themselves redoubling their efforts at some things and just literally casting others adrift, just simply walking away from them. We've seen it again and again. And that's partly because there's no room anymore in the electromagnetic system for denial. It's recognised that every time we criticise or judge somebody else, we're simply judging a reflection of ourselves. It's self-judgment. And so to say I can forgive this but I won't forgive that is basically to stand between creation and the heart of all, from which everything springs, which is a form of denial. If we had the teachers and the parents and the children and all the training and experience of the person that's being criticised, then it's not reasonable to think we would do anything other than they would. So there's no room for denial, and forgiveness tends to start arising rather than temper, I found as well. Much more likely over time. It's an unfolding process, but over time you can seriously learn to shrug at things that would have driven you screaming up the wall previously. Like I say, it all kind of unfolds from within us. What it basically is a template of light that remains at the base of everything that has happened since. It's a bit like a returning to an original model, if you like, in which telepathic communication, heart-to-heart communion, all of that is part of that original model. Another thing that I found personally very important about it is that I became much more sensitive to synchronicities and to messages from the environment about me. Perhaps beforehand I was just far too busy and far too mackled up in the administrative world. But after this I started noticing that I wasn't without guides, that there were bits of information in the landscape around me, and you know, it might be just kind of glancing at a huge pile of plates that's standing by the kitchen sink, and you get this kind of little inkling that it's going to fall down and you do nothing about it. In the old days it would have just fell down. I started noticing that I was getting little precursor signals of things that were happening around me, in everything from the domestic to the wild. The closer to the wild or the sacred space these things were happening, the bigger and more relevant they seem to be. In the kitchen it's just saving yourself a few smashed plates. So. Sensitivity to synchronicity. That's interesting. I don't know why it's doing that, but this is the conclusion of part one. I'm trying to see how long have we done here. Oh, we've only done 25 minutes, so I'll probably move on into part two as well. Technically this is a 2-hour slot, and we can have a break in the middle if we want to, but it seems to be going quite swiftly so far. Is everybody happy?
Yes.
I now want to read just a little bit of what Juliet Carter wrote in that introduction that I enjoy doing so much. This is a bit of Juliet at her best, I think. It says, "The ceremony is a covenant born of our remembrance of our quintessential identity, our innocence. It is at this focal moment in Earth's history, poised as we are on the razor's edge between success and failure, between light and shadow, between intellectual analysis and ancient indigenous knowledge, that we are able to make fulcrum decisions that have a full spectrum impact upon every level of our being, making conscious the knowledge that we are the source generating all the experiences that we have, as we step out of the pathological obedience that has led to our victimhood and into the light world of creatorship. We stand together between the world of commerce and the new heartland, and it is here that we will weave a world of dreaming on the great loom of Maya." It's a piece of writing that really captures the spirit of this technology and what it is that we're talking about. So long ago she was saying, as we step out of the pathological obedience that has led to our victimhood. I didn't know anything about the pathological obedience at that point. It was going to be 10, 12 years before I started stumbling into the fact that I've become manipulated and enslaved. So, and this is the way this introduction works, is each time I go back to it, I realise I've found out much more about what this lady was talking about all that time ago. And that business about being standing together between the world of commerce and the new heartland, how does that feel? It is here that we will weave a world of dreaming on the great loom of Maya. And so we heard at the very beginning how the actual administrative nature of the state that we're in is directly connected to the kind of psychological states and the sort of applications that are given by our myths and histories to the end of a world age. People forget to be grateful, people forget to be reciprocal in their activity, people forget that we are all born equal in the eyes of the Creator. That's one of the aspects of the end of end of a world age, or the end of a sun, whatever we want to call it, that I find right across the piece. Been doing a lot of reading about it recently, right across the world. There are also physical aspects to the end of these world ages. They always involve celestial influences. Sometimes, as I was talking about in Worlds in Collision, celestial impulses that can come uncomfortably close, physically close to the Earth. Sometimes there are other influences. And I'd like to bring your attention, if you haven't come across it, to a YouTube channel called Suspicious Observers. These little quotes come from, I'm going to do a bit more work on this part of the talk, but again, I've got to realise that just this little bit about the state of the solar system is actually probably an hour or so stuff on its own. It's changing so fast, and Suspicious Observers are the people who are really watching it carefully. They, for a start off, they every now and then, probably once a week, maybe twice a week, they release a little thing called 3 or 4 minute news, and what they're looking at is solar flares on the sun, how many are upcoming, where they are. They look at ones that are going to come to Earth, and they look at earthquake activity that is directly associated with these positive plasma charges, no doubt affecting the negatively charged Earth, because we've seen comets vanish when they get hit by these solar waves. That's what happened to Elenin. Negatively charged item flying through space, wave of protons hits it from the sun when it's out in the heliosphere, and it just vanished, and it's one of a dozen comets that's happened to. in the last 10 years or so. These people keep a close eye on all of that. They keep an eye on sea levels, some of the buoys that are in the sea, and also they've got a really great video out there called How to Watch the Sun, which gives you all of the websites that they use to put together their 3-minute news so you can watch it yourself. I do a radio show every Thursday night on a wireless system, and every now and then it just won't work, and I've been given access to a space weather forecast, which is really great. It tells me whether there's too much flux in the electron belt, you know. But these things, the things they're bringing up are amazing. I've been watching them for 2 years, and there's some crazy stuff going on in our solar system, and you would really never guess it. And we just kick off with the solar minimum, something that we've just experienced. Actually, it was well below a solar minimum. We actually dropped down to no sun flares, no sunspots, sun flares at all for a while. The important thing is that the solar flares are responsible for expanding our atmosphere. So our atmosphere is actually collapsing substantially at the moment, and you'll find evidence of that all over the internet. Chicken licking was right. The sky is falling. Actually, a lady I saw talking at the Green Gathering was telling us that she actually arranged the solar minimum to do a load of experiments on site with some monks in a temple, in a monastery, because they knew it was the solar minimum, and they said over the next 3 years we'll see it rise. So we'll be able to see what the difference is in the monks' performance. And to her great disappointment, it just continued to crash, and it didn't start going up again until the day they finished the experiments. What a piss off must that be? All that funding, 3 years of work, and you hit an anomalous patch of weather. Venus already spins really slowly and in the wrong direction. Doesn't spin in the same direction as all the other planets. Spins much more slowly than the rest of them, and has a really most circular orbit of all of the planets. It's got anomalously high temperatures on it, which are getting anomalously even higher. It's getting brighter as a result. Earthquakes on Moon and Mars, completely consistent with the electric universe idea that earthquakes are a response between negatively charged bodies in space and a positively charged solar entity that is travelling through the middle of them, like this. Jupiter spots, yes, there's been the big spot that's been there forever has disappeared, and we've got a smaller, more dense spot that has appeared somewhere else. That is a really, really big change. The colour of the rings has changed and the distribution of them. Jupiter also transmits radio waves, something that was predicted by Velikovsky in the Worlds in Collision talk. He said there will be radio waves found coming from Jupiter. Totally ludicrous idea at the time he put it out there, but turned out to be true. Jupiter is now described as singing in a new octave. So the frequencies, something's happening to the frequencies on Jupiter. And the flash, yes, there was a really, really almighty flash which they tried to claim was something flying into the atmosphere, but you can clearly see from all of the space probe info that isn't the case. It seems to be some kind of electrical anomaly actually on the surface of Jupiter's atmosphere. Saturn's slowing down. It's also developed a storm very much like Jupiter's, because that's what the spots are on Jupiter, is their storms. And this has really done their head in. You know, we see this aurora borealis, this kind of northern lights that reaches down from the North Pole. There's one from the southern pole. It happens when a plasma charge reaches us from the sun and enters through a hole in our shrinking atmosphere, and as a result of our also failing magnetic field, which is something else that the lady in the Psi research noticed. They're now seeing auroras on Uranus. That means that these solar charges, or something like them, are actually being seen right out on the edge of the solar system. Most weird. It does appear that in energetic terms radical change is occurring, and on a large scale. This video up here, Our World is Changing, gives you a really good summary of all of those things. It's large scale energetic change not only on Earth but in the solar system. Also, I'm told I got started receiving rather alarming videos about only 3 or 4 days ago, that over the last 10 days the moon, which is always within 5 degrees or so of the ecliptic, has suddenly over a period of only 10 days kind of leapt to 14 degrees away from the ecliptic. That is a big change and something it shouldn't be doing. Subsequently I talked to Andy, who's one of the organisers for this, having heard that he'd had a bit of trouble with the moon. Apparently it was last year. He was concerned that it didn't appear to be behaving regularly in the night sky, so he measured his height. He kind of put 2 gaffer tape marks on the kitchen floor, and he started putting his head waking up at 10 o'clock at night, going and putting his forehead against where the moon was on the window and then marking it. and he said it made a steady progression for 3 or 4 days, and suddenly it was on the other window, and then later it came back again. Well, now I get these videos from a very boring American who isn't very good at explaining what's happening, so I don't have the details of it, but I thought, well, that is well strange. What Andy told me is even stranger, but do you know the strangest thing? Some friends of mine went sailing in their boat off Aberystwyth last week, and Sue came back, and she doesn't know the first thing about any of these things. And she said to me, do you know, Nick, something very strange? She said the tides are nearly always within 10 minutes or so of 6 hours. She said this time we went down there and there were 7 hours between them.
God, that's distinctive.
Very odd, eh? Because the Earth is the moon is responsible for most of the tidal action, and the spinning of the Earth throws the tides towards the centre, so there's a bulge around the equator. Another very, very strange thing that is just doing my head right in is one of the things suspicious observers keep an eye on is a very colourful picture of the Earth's magnetic field as it flows out into space. And sometimes you get these big taily lines that are flapping around out here, and they're kind of opened like a squid. Sometimes they close right up, so you've got closed magnetic lines around the Earth. 1 minute if I could. Sometimes recently, and this is probably something to do with the Uranus, the auroras on Uranus, sometimes we've seen these waves of solar power coming in from the blind side. So the sun's over there and there's these big magnetic washes coming in from over here. Most recently, and accompanying the news about the moon, are pictures from these instruments that are measuring the magnetic field, showing that there seems to be, anyway, last time I looked, it was happening just as I came away, there seems to be a really huge magnetic field from somewhere that's now running across the tail of the Earth. So whereas the Earth's magnetic field's doing that, and this is something I've not seen before, you've got another one, set of tails just like ours, but coming down perpendicular to it. Lord knows what it is, but the more of these guys you watch, the more you find out that, that there is a whole lot of very strange stuff. Yes, sir.
Oh, right. So, have I got this right? The moon, its tilt, is it?
I think its tilt's changed in the past as well. What we're saying at the moment is that if this is the ecliptic, and you know, here's Earth, the moon, well, if that's the ecliptic, the moon is always either that much above it or that much below it. And in all the textbooks, it doesn't move from like 5 or 5.1 degrees. What we're saying is that in 10 days, it suddenly went like that. In other words, it did some...
Has it stopped there, or is it still there?
Well, whether it looks to be doing that, or whether something's happening to Earth which makes it appear that way to us, is something that I really don't understand enough to comment on.
Yeah, last night as well, it looked like the moon, considering it was full moon 2 days ago,
Yeah.
it looks like it's waned a lot, it's gone down a lot more than
Yeah,
normal.
I've had people telling me that on their birthday it's normally light at night and it's dark this year and things like that. And thing is that we're energetic entities, we're sensitive to all of these changes. We've heard in the prophecies that in these stories of the end times that are repeated endlessly all over the world, even in our Bible, they're in there even, but all over the world, the ends of ages when people forget to be grateful and humanity once again to the clay from which it was formed returns, or they get turned into monkeys or wooden creatures, or there's a whole load of things that happens. This time it's supposed to be different. This time we are approaching the age of Aquarius. This time we are already, according to Litmus, who's done the calculations at projectfreeman.com, he reckons we're already 200, 300 years into the ascending awakening cycle that is prophesied by the Yugas, the Kali, the Yugas. Indian prophecies that chime pretty well with the Mayas one. So we are anticipating a change in the light levels. This is what the ceremony people said. There's going to be the levels of light are going to change. What's happening to the electromagnetic radiation on Earth will change. So the level of light coming from the sun is changing. The magnetic field is dropping away, which means more of it's getting through, and our atmosphere is collapsing also, which is also having some very, very strange effects, which again we don't have time to go into. As predicted, the quality of the light is changing. We have a pineal gland in our head, in the centre, where the third eye is, roughly between the third eye and where the eyes are, and it has got light-sensitive fibres in it. It's not entirely light-sensitive cells, but it has light-sensitive fibres, and that's what it's for, is to collect light. What the ancients said was that our pineal gland is like a holographic representation of the sun, and that the sun itself is stepping down information which is being beamed to us from the mind of light beyond the sun in the heart of our galaxy. What the ceremony we talked about earlier is doing is it's reconnecting you to those energetic sources. We're expecting an awakening. How many of us think we're seeing a bit of an awakening going on around us?
Oh, right.
Only a little one.
Only a little one. Yeah, well, it's really going to take off, I think. So what I want to do now, that's about 45 minutes. If we could have I'm told it's 5:45. Have a 15-minute break if that's all right with people, and start again at 6 o'clock. And I'm going to start looking at whether, we know, and we're going to see some of them, we know the catastrophes that I described in Worlds in Collision were massive. Mountains were raised where there weren't any, other mountains collapsed, the sea boiled, it was raining fire, it was beyond mayhem. We're going to see buildings that definitely survived those experiences. We know that humans survived those experiences because they wrote about them. What I really want to look at in a bit of detail in the second half is whether those people that survived were able to leave us any kind of warning, any information. Is there anything coming through to us in this day and age which might hint at what they knew of? In the meantime, thank you very much for being here instead of with the mighty Bonacci. I do appreciate it. You're going to sit there till 6 o'clock now?
No.
Okay, I forgot to start with stopwatch, so I'm sorry if I'm a bit late on the finishing. It's got a vertical line built into the slope. Can you see that? This will be, I think, a solstice photograph, which means that line is being cast as some part of the shadow being made by the sun. You can see it's the rising sun casting a shadow along one of the hidden structural features. Now that's a pretty amazing thing to do. This is vast, and somebody's put a straight line down the middle of it so that it's actually slightly concave, and I'm told the tolerances on that line down the middle of it are completely astonishing. It's suggested by orthodoxy that what's happened is there's been a partial collapse on this face of the pyramid, on an absolutely dead straight line. Doesn't seem very likely, especially when you realise that all the other four walls have got them as well. So it's actually an 8-sided object. It's slightly star-shaped. Now I find that absolutely gobsmacking as a surveying job. It's pretty amazing as it is, as we'll see. But to put extra lines in, we get to see that the quarry marks that were made by them are really like the quarry marks that we see nowadays. Of course, they weren't supposed to have had metal saws and all that sort of stuff. Actually, I know, again, a man I met at the Green Gathering called Stephen Duros is doing a whole load of work with stone, with moving telluric currents around, and he also works stone. He builds stone circles and the like, and he's been to Egypt. He actually runs a Facebook page called Machines of the Ancients, yeah, and he's seen marks of saws on some of these stones. He says you can see how big the blade was, you can see how many teeth it had, you can see how fast it was moving through the stone. That's the point of these. That's slightly more detail on these. There's more quarry marks. One's on the left 1998, the one's on the right 2750 BC. So once again we go back to the stone hammers and the sophisticated chisels, we'll say. These do not look like the work of either of those things. I love this picture because it's so huge. It's unfinished and it's lying exactly where it was carved. It's 126 feet long and estimated to weigh some 1,300 tons. Although I found a lot of these weights are somewhat. I think the pyramids thing is pretty accurate though. In the old books, there's quite a lot of things that you can't actually believe the weights they're giving you. And the obelisk is still attached to the ground by a spine of rock, which is lying beneath the dressed item. So there's a gap underneath it, and the obelisk is still part of the ground. It's been made like that in position. Obviously it'd have to be removed by some means. Here's a picture of the drainage channel that runs around this obelisk, because obviously if you're going to spend a bit of time working on something like that, you don't want it filling with water. Once again, quite a complicated shape to be chipping out of the stone. I love things like this. I take a magazine called Current World Archaeology, and absolutely everything that they find, and they don't really know what it was, or if we haven't got anything like it now, they by and large say that it's a religious item of some sort. And apparently this particular array of interesting looking items are classified as sacrificial bowls or as a religious altar, which I suppose might be the case. As a bit of an aside, this is a place called Swayhat, which, as you can't quite see from the map, you can see there's a blue lake in the middle of the map, close to the top. That's a man-made reservoir. It's massive, and it was supposed to fill the place enough to get at Swayhat. This place was no longer supposed to be there. There's a little mound you can see on the horizon on the top. Everywhere over there was built as mounds. This one I think is said to be 10 or 12 metres high. It was just desert. It's in the really, really arid parts of Iraq, between the irrigated south and the really arid north. It has prospered. They reckon this place prospered until well beyond the fall of Sumer and Babylon. It's a place in the middle of somewhere that was useful for something for many thousands of years and became heavily fortified. It makes a guest appearance here really to demonstrate how bizarre some archaeological conclusions can seem. This is what they found when they started digging. How exciting must that be as a job? It just looked like a patch of desert, and they've actually got in there, they've got a full town, quite a substantial place. This is a picture of some kind of entrance to what they call a temple. There's apparently a door over on the left hand side of the picture that nobody's ever been through there or gone looking. And actually one of my most frustrating things about archaeology is that it seems not to be digging in many of the places I'd really like it to go. So it doesn't actually go in there for some reason. This is the one that I want to really look at. This is a place that I have found now. It's got different sized holes in the ground. Some of them are really quite big. You can see there's also smaller holes. There's channels that run from some holes and not to other holes. This is a reconstruction in the top left. There seem to be geometric shapes carved out of stone there. I don't know whether they invented those or whether they found them there. But one thing is, it says we do not know what god or goddess was worshipped at Swayhat's temple. The paucity of sacred objects may indicate the building was partially looted before it was burned. So they're saying they didn't find any sacred objects in it, but they're assuming it's a church anyway. And then they go, beneath the floor we found deep cylindrical pits. Channels led to and interconnected with many of these pits, which hints at another use, perhaps a religious function involving the pouring of liquids. Seems far more likely that it's an engineering or chemical works of some sort to me. There had to be some reason for them putting this place in the middle and really, really a long way away from anywhere, and it benefited somehow, no matter what was going on in the international scene around it.
Yeah.
Very interesting, but there you go. They found no religious artifacts in it at all. They're still convinced it's a temple and that they were doing religious rituals involving the pouring of liquids. There you go. I love archaeologists. They're great. Quite like to be an archaeologist, but it's too hot. Return to the chase. This is another distinctly quirky Egyptian item. I love this one. I first read about this 20 years ago, which connects it directly with the template material, because they were using Zachariah Sitchin as a background story to what happened to our genetic fabric, that there was manipulation in it. It's a load of stuff about information that came out of Sumer and Babylon. I noticed old Zachariah's been taking a bit of a kicking on the internet. There's a site saying Zachariah Sitchin is wrong. Quite a lot of quite old arguments, some of which I think are well supported, but he wrote a lot of stuff, and I have the kind of impression that much of it was probably pretty much correct in principle. This thing, the photograph in the book, Sitchin book, wasn't too good. It's known as a 3-petal lotus vase, is what it's known as. That's a computer reconstruction on the right and a photo of the actual item behind grass on the left. It's also known as the disc of Sabu. It has several other names. It is exotically curved, perfectly round, and looks nothing like a vase. It also looks like at one stage it had a spindle through it or something. Yeah, and there's an even better picture of it. A physicist interviewed for Revelation of the Pyramid appeals for engineers to have access to some of these items to assess their potential as parts of machinery.
Yeah.
And they don't get that access.
No.
Amazing looking thing, really. I think it's stone. I think it's stone. I imagine that it might have been used for slip casting or something, I don't know. And I haven't spoken with Steve about it. He has a photograph of it, but I didn't get time to talk to him about what he thought it was. I will do though. However, this one's really bang to rights. This one is. This is a statue, I think, of Ramesses II. Anybody notice anything strange about that really huge granite statue?
Looks more like a woman.
It's absolutely symmetrical. Absolutely bang on symmetrical. And remember, we're talking flash chisels and stone hammers,
Is
perhaps.
that true of our years? Or is that the camera?
No, that's probably the camera. We'll see another picture of it from the side in a minute. A mathematician points out that if the curve of the chin is extended, you can see there's a curve on the lips and the curve on the chin there, if they're extended, it yields a circle of a given size. Because this is a plane view from in front of it, you have to remember that the jaw, as well as kind of going round that way, also protrudes, and viewed from the side, the jaw juts forward and reveals that the entire face is construed from circles of the same size. Anybody any idea how difficult that is?
Yeah.
Not only is it perfectly symmetrical, it's amazing. It's all built on plane circles somehow. It shows an astonishing mastery of theoretical and applied geometry, quite apart from anything else. In fact, you'd need that to produce such an artifact, to say nothing of complete extreme skill with your hammer and your chisel. As the mathematician says, it's unbelievable. This sort of condition does not arise by accident. What was guiding the tool? In all the years I've been looking at these things, that's one of my favourites, because you just go, well, as Stephen Joss would say, it's completely impossible. It's not only in Egypt. Several characteristics encountered in Egypt are actually also found elsewhere in the world. This is a plinth on Easter Island, designed to hold Maui, the statues for which the island's most famous. Large, precisely shaped stones just at Luxor. You can see very similar style in the building there. This is also a picture of this is the biggest Maui, still in the ground, carved in situ and attached to the ground with a ridge along its back, just like the obelisk we saw. So almost all of the Easter Island statues face inland, apparently, apart from these 7 which face outward, and they're apparently looking at the point on the horizon where the equinoctial sun rises. So one set of statues appear to have been set up facing in a different direction, something that I'd really like to check up for myself, but this is what the Revelations team said. Even more weird, and this is something that I had heard before, is that blocks of stone such as those seen on Easter Island are also found at Mohenjo-Daro, which is in Pakistan. I think that's 3,500 BC, something like that. There was evidence, I believe, that there was quite a sophisticated society there with internal plumbing and all sorts of things, possibly even before the arising of Sumer. But there's also a clear similarity between as yet untranslated script that's been found in both places. You can see the Easter Island pictures on the top and Mohenjo-Daro, Pakistan, on the other. So they're in very different places, very different times as well. I was reading only yesterday that the date for believed occupation of Easter Island has now moved to something like 1200 AD. Mohenjo-Daro is 3,500 BC. This mixture of scripts is very interesting, that being the case. There's a level bond with small horizontal locks to resist earthquakes. We see quite a lot of that over in Peru and the like. Again, the small stones in smaller holes. What they do is they kind of they have a little bit of an uptick at the end of some of the horizontal rocks. It's only tiny, but it's enough to stop stones moving sideways, meaning they think that the shockwave of any kind of earthquake runs straight through them. Here's another example of pretty much similar thing. Large horizontal horizontal locks on the stone stop it sliding sideways. And look at that, look at those little stones underneath those big stones on the bottom. That's something that strikes me again and again about these old works, is they really like to put big stones on top of little stones. We do tend to do it the other way around. In Malta there's some amazingly huge stones on top of really quite small slim stones, to presumably to get the levels they're after. Beautiful stonework though. It always looks to me like they've been almost melted into place. That's a bigger picture of Sacsayhuaman. You can see that it's an extensive structure, a detail of which we just saw. You can see the small people there, giving you some idea of how big the biggest stones are. And it kind of looks defensive to me, and I've read stories about the various castles they built in the Bible, and when they started getting a bit trick at defending themselves, they put these kind of wobbles in so that people who are coming at the bottom of the wall, you can throw stuff from around them instead of just at them. But I have no idea what these people were doing here, who they were, and I really don't think anybody else has either. We've got large stones here as well, wavy level bond with locks, small stones on top of large stones. It's quite likely that there are 3 levels of building here, one from ancient people who we don't really know who they were, but whoever they were, their work was discovered by the Inca when they came from, I think it was Lake Titicaca. And the Inca, unlike us, didn't rifle everything and stuff and use it for building other things. What they did was they propped stuff up in the places where it was, so they could actually make use of it or worship it, whatever they were going to do. still in situ. So I had a lot of respect for what they found. So we know the Inca did some of the building, and we also know the moderns did. I'm pretty sure we don't know who the ancients were who did it. We've got an array of stone, dressed stone here, from the really extremely large to the very small. There's beveled stone, again they've got locks on them, and we've got these strange protrusions coming out of them on this. Another thing we see is a lot of worn protrusion on the rocks in Peru, in this part of the world. This is another picture of extensive engineering from that part of the world. So what we're basically seeing, you can see again the sort of common style there between this and Luxor. It's differently executed, because presumably there was a different culture doing it, presumably. But we see buildings all over the world, and really they're from very different times. Remember, there was a stretch between 1200 AD, say, for Easter Island, to maybe 3,500 BC, and maybe a lot further back in Egypt. Some of the things there are well argued for dates back 10,000, 13,000 years BC. And orthodoxy explains this similarity of grandiose architectural style by saying that these populations experienced similar problems, and so they came up with similar solutions. It's fair enough, I suppose. Must have been happening for a while, but they came up with some pretty outrageous solutions. They included in all of these places some or all of the following: mummified bodies, extremely keen, a lot of these places, on mummifying people. Forms of hieroglyphic writing sprung up in Mexico, in Egypt, in all of these places, Peru. Advanced astrological skills. All of these buildings are really carefully aligned one way or the other. And an as yet, as we say, unfathomable techniques for working and moving the hardest stones on earth. They really like to work with andesite, with granite, with basalt, with marble, basically with stones that had large amounts of crystal in them. This wasn't always the case. Sometimes they had reasons for using sedimentary stone, and I'm sure that if you go and look at Steve's site, you'll see more about that. It's to do with electricity and magnetism, that probably. But they had this capacity for assembling all of these prepared materials into architectures of breathtaking design, scale and precision. And not only that, these people appear to have known about each other's work. This was one of the real eye-openers for me about Revelation of the Pyramids. I was thrilled when they did this. They'd already given me loads of stuff that I was really excited to see. But this really is amazing, I think. They seem to have known about each other's work, even though they were separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Because there's a line here, a dead straight line that runs from Easter Island to Giza and beyond. And it turns out to be a really extensive line. You can see they've kicked it off there at Easter Island, which means it's heading east towards Peru. You can see Nazca lined up on there. So if we kick up with Easter Island, that's the place where it starts. Lovely photo. Then it goes to a place called Paracas, which is famous in Peru for its 540 foot long sort of carving in the stone there, and it's aligned perfectly with due north. Also, I interviewed a chap on the show called Brian Forster, who's part of a museum that's got a load of elongated skulls in it. It would appear that all over the world, people, aristocracy, used to bind the heads of their infants from about 3 months, it's reckoned, to maybe 4 years, so that their heads grew long. The last of these practices apparently only died out a couple of 100 years ago. So we have quite a lot of skulls on Earth that are of these earlier humans and all kind of elongated. Now there've been a lot of very strange skulls turned up, and they've nearly all found their ways into private collections. Brian's museum, he's running it with his, I think, an executive director, and running it with a local man. They give money to local farmers who come up with these skulls and stuff, and the farmers feel a bit of loyalty to the museum and stuff, and so they've got a whole load of elongated skulls. Inca Tours, I think Brian Forster's website's called, incatours.com, and you can see some of these pictures there. He has 2 skulls. The human skull's got a frontal plate and a left parietal plate and a right parietal plate. That's what a human skull has. They've got skulls there, at least 2, which is like 40% bigger than a human skull, and they've only got a front and back plate. And there's 2 little holes in the back plate as well. They don't know what they were for, maybe blood or nerves. But I said to Brian, Brian, we're defined by our bones. That's what makes us human. If it hasn't got the same sort of skull as we've got, then surely it's not human. But being of a scientific bent, he's insisting on waiting for the DNA analysis. This was 18 months ago, so hopefully I'll be able to give him a ring. But Paracas, very, very interesting place. And they've also now found pyramids there, buried in the sand. quite large pyramids. There seem to be pyramids absolutely everywhere. So that's Paracas. It goes next to Nazca, some 600 petroglyphs in all, although I think some 400 have already been lost. Still pretty much unexplained and inexplicable marks on the landscape visible only from space. It goes to Ollantaytambo in Peru, another lovely example of earthquake-proof engineering there. It goes through Machu Picchu. They imagine this line to be, I think, 100 kilometers wide as it goes along. Machu Picchu goes through Cusco in Peru, another really great wall. Look at that. It goes to Sacsayhuaman in Peru, which is where that large crenulated installation we saw with the little pictures is. Peru, Paratuari. I'd never heard of this place before. That's the only picture I could come across of it on the internet. I'd like to know a bit more. Looks a bit like a worked pyramid, like in Bosnia. I heard somebody telling me the other day that the Mendip Hills are pyramids as well. You could go digging in there. From Peru, it heads off over an ocean and arrives in West Africa at the Dogon country. The people who knew about Sirius B, which is invisible to the naked eye, before astronomers did. And I think people are pretty certain now that there wasn't any kind of cross-cultural contamination with the anthropologists. It then goes to another place I hadn't heard of, in Algeria. I don't know how you say that. I like to say Tassili Nadja, because that's what it looks like, but that's a pretty strange looking place. I'd like to know more about that too. Once again, the only picture I could find when I went looking. Then it heads off to Siwa in Egypt. It goes over Giza, of course one of our main ceremonial plateaus. It goes to this lovely place, Petra in Jordan, all of these rock caves. It goes to ancient Ur in Sumer, one of the oldest cities on earth. It goes through Persepolis, another very famous historical place. It goes through Mohenjo-Daro, the place in Pakistan that we just connected with Easter Island through the scripts, remember. Then it goes to India, off to Thailand, Cambodia, Angkor Wat. That's one of, I believe this is one of the more modern buildings on the place. I think this was built around 1400 after a substantial amount of surveying was done. I gather that whoever it was that built this kicked off by building capital cities actually close to its cardinal points before they went for it. Also recently Angkor Wat, from presumably from Mr. Google, has been discovered to be considerably more massive. Actually these causeways go for really long distances, and it's very cosmically illustrated building. Lots of demons pulling a snake, churning the Milky Way and all of that. It does seem to be an astronomically related place. And lastly, another one that I hadn't heard of in Cambodia, another absolutely stunning looking place. The projector's a bit light. You can see a great fall away there, and you can see kind of evidence of civilization below. But all of those places exist on this line, and me and my housemate, and then it goes of course back to Easter Island. It's difficult to date many of these sites accurately. In fact, I'm not sure how accurate any of the dating is that's being done. But the most recent, say it's Angkor Wat or Easter Island, was built 1400, maybe 1200 AD. Whilst orthodoxy suggests that the Great Pyramid, like I say, is some 5,000 years ago, evidence is accumulating to suggest that at least some aspects of the Giza Plateau are actually a lot older than that. But this is a wicked and substantial project, you know. Such unity of vision over thousands of years and thousands of miles suggests quite strongly that information is somehow being stored and transmitted. Do you not think? That was one of the main revelations of this to me, because we understand about the individual buildings, but that's amazing. And the thing is, we didn't really believe it, tell you the truth, because we were looking at maps and we were thinking, well, how can that be in a straight line from that? So, being children of the Blue Peter generation, we decided we'd bring the highest of high tech to bear on it, and we got ourselves a globe and a piece of masking tape, and we marked these places so you can see it coming from Easter Island on the left, running across Peru, then over and into West Africa where the Dogon are, and then it runs over all the other places, India, Iraq, Cambodia, Thailand, and then heads off just sort of north of Australia, and then runs, can't even see it on that picture, it must be on it though, that's a bit weird. I can see it on here. There's a dirty patch just about kind of a couple of inches above from the bottom of the globe there. You can see it, you can just about see it running round. Isn't it amazing how empty the other half of the globe is? It's a bit like Mars. It's really smooth on its northern hemisphere and completely, really, really spectacularly rough on the other side. But so the line does go all the way round. And quite a lot of these sites, like this one, certainly are established on much more ancient sites, making it a bit difficult to date exactly when the project began. But this is certainly one of the most fascinating earthly artifacts. They do bring out a few more interesting things. Phi and pi are two geometric expressions that are central to our understanding of form and its growth into space. Each of them are irrational numbers, which means the numbers after the decimal place are infinite and they're non-repeating. So they're very interesting numbers. Phi, there's a lot more about phi in my sacred geometry talk, which you can see on the internet. It's probably about to go on the road again as well, hopefully. But essentially, phi is a ratio that basically defines how number unfolds into three-dimensional space. It seems that everything that's growing is using phi. It's a really efficient way of multiplying things by only adding things together. It's the more you look at it, the more fantastic it is. The Great Pyramid makes loads of use of both of those. The circle that's pictured there sits just inside the corners of the square. Can everybody see that? But the circumference of the circle is equal in length to the combined sides of the base. So if you measured the length of the circle, it would be the same length as the base of the pyramid, the same length as the square base of the pyramid. This is called squaring the circle. It was quite a problem for quite a long time. The interesting thing is that it's the radius of that circle that's used as the height for the Great Pyramid, which is one of the things that makes it a unique pyramid. There's lots of signs of pyramids after it which kind of start off that steep and then shallow off. There's other pyramids that kind of bend at the top, and it's kind of like they wanted to make one of these but could never quite reach this kind of angle again. And I think it is unique. As far as I know, there aren't any other pyramids. The thing is that it's unique amongst pyramids, and it sets up, that particular thing sets up a whole load of geometric tricks that only apply specifically to a pyramid of this design and this specific size. Something else that was a revelation to me. If the Great Pyramid was even a few centimetres smaller, they say on Revelations of the Pyramids, these expressions would not apply. To give you just a couple of examples, please don't glaze over, two really short examples of how this actually works. If you add up the surface of all four sides of the Great Pyramid and divide it by the total area of the base, it equals phi, this golden cut that's used in all the art and all the growth of everything. If you take half of the perimeter at the bottom times its height, that equals phi as well. And apparently there's loads of places. Here we see
sorry, can you pop back to that?
Yeah.
If you put a second circle joining the points of the square,
Yeah.
you can put another triangle on top of that. No, you can put another square on top of that. So a triangle, circle and square.
Yeah.
And the ratio, which are 3, 4, 5 triangles.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've also got the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Well,
It's also the expression of the moon's size and orbital.
Yes.
And it does more things than that as well. This is the so-called sarcophagus. We can see we've got 2 times phi to the power 2, 3 times phi squared, 5 times phi squared, and 4 times phi squared. This is one of the places where Steve says they definitely were using metal saws to cut through this sarcophagus and get it to this kind of size. Egyptian measuring rods for cubits varied between 52 and 53 centimetres, depends where you looked at them. Whereas if you divide pi by phi squared, you get something that's 52 centimetres, 3 6/10 of a millimetre, which is precisely the length of cubit used to construct this particular pyramid. I love that one. It would seem therefore that the construction team at the Great Pyramid were working to tolerances they didn't have the tools to verify. So we would like to know how they do that. And apparently, and again, obviously I don't speak Egyptian, so I can't verify this. Anybody who finds any different, I'd love to know. The Egyptians apparently don't mention phi in any of their writings, and yet the builders of this structure were using phi, pi, and even more extraordinarily the metre. They actually came up with the metre before the French did. And they were using it to create a cubit of precisely 52.36 centimetres, which also means that the pyramid is a scale model of the sphere of the Earth itself. A couple of pictures of the internals there. Lots of things that I don't really want to go into at the moment. But they say the probability of this pyramid being as it is by chance is 0. The volume of the Great Pyramid was picked to reveal phi, the golden number. So many coincidences with such a big object, the physicist says. It's very disturbing. We know they measured the Earth. They built a scale model in the form of the Great Pyramid. They built a series of artifacts along a line that circumnavigated the globe. Now, it interests me that that line that circumnavigates the globe is actually at 30 degrees to our existing equator, and it is a great circle. Like the equator, it goes all the way around the Earth, and I'm wondering if there's a significance between the fact that that line's at 30 degrees to the equator, and Earth, as it is in space at the moment, is at 30 degrees to the ecliptic. We're told none of these things are likely to be significant coincidences. One or two more very interesting points before we come to the end. The 7 heads on Easter Island look towards the equinoctial sunrise. All of the sites mentioned earlier include substantial structures that also fulfill this function, and the Revelations team looks specifically at the Sphinx, which is a pretty mysterious object, and it also looks to this point on the horizon. As precession proceeds, this sunrise shifts against the background stars on a roughly 26,000 year cycle. It's said that it's thought by this team that maybe the new age begins when the equinoctial sunrise is conjunct with the star Regulus in Leo. This is because there's a glyph on the Sphinx's chest, roughly 2160, a great month from the present. But this might be an exotic clock built from vast earthquake-proof, precisely aligned constructions spanning the globe, pointing possibly to exactly where we are now at the end of an old age and heading towards the dawn of something new, which I thought was bang on the answer to the question I was looking for. Really, is were these guys trying to tell us something? It seems highly likely that they were. Certainly that line of buildings suggests that stuff's being brought forward. I love this one too. If a circle's drawn inside the base and its area is subtracted from the area of a circle enclosing the base, the resulting number is pretty damn close to the speed of light as currently understood.
Oh.
Yeah, and also, this is really brilliant, the distance between two of the pyramid's ribs, i.e. between two of those liney bits that come down from the top, indicates the average distance that a point on the equator moves through space in 1 second. Yeehaw. I mean, that is one striking building. What's happened to all the skills that did that? Whether it was actually somebody who's been and come and gone, whether it's just that although the buildings withstand these periodic cataclysms and inundations and firestorms that we suffer, but the technology didn't, where's all the metal gone? You know, if we can be pretty certain that these guys were either using a technology or they were using something we definitely didn't understand. And it's not only them. A spectacular medieval cathedral, this is the facade of the Strasbourg Cathedral in France, also you see from the Revelations and the pyramids. The window marks the position of the equinoctial sun on the horizon, like many of the ancient things we've been looking at. And they point out that the shape and proportions of the Great Pyramid are hidden in the facade of Strasbourg Cathedral, even though when the cathedral was built, the Great Pyramid was still largely unremembered and covered in sand. The pyramid's enjoying a bit of a renaissance, folk. I don't know whether any of you have been to Dublin and seen the Bank of Ireland recently. It's made up of loads of little pyramids, and when you're in the front of it, they all make it up into a giant pyramid. It really made my hair stand on end. And all the rest of the new buildings in Dublin look like ships. So very strange. And there's been resurgent the idea of the pyramid since the Crusades, funnily enough, when I guess we found out about it. But it does seem that ancient secrets have been passed down through time. Committed exploration of this part of our history leads inexorably to all sorts of secrets, occult brotherhoods, and the very dawn of international banking, and beyond that into prehistory. As you look into the movement of this data from those times in Egypt and Babylon to this day, that's where you find it coming out of, is all these places which are, I think, perhaps a step too far for this talk. That's like a scale model of the Great Pyramid. It's ideal as a capstone. This is what they found when they went to look at it in 2005. You can see it runs right to the bottom of that, to the top of the pyramid of the block that it's standing on. There's no beveling. It's just the pyramid. When they went to look at it in 2008, somebody had done that to it. Now, all of this end of the age stuff I think is really important. I think energetically, prophetically, there's all manner of things going on. And I feel that the awakening we're experiencing is far more than just the withdrawal of our consent on this level. I think we're waking up from something that we hadn't even really begun to dream of until recently. I think that all sorts of things are coincident with this, such as changes in the quality of light, changes in the position of the planets around us, an amazing opposition between Pluto and Uranus, which happened 7 times between 2012 and 2015. And one of these things always presages a change of consciousness in humanity. the astrologer I heard talking about it said that we've had 3 of these rings so far since 2012, and he said, just think, he said, if you were in the light entertainment industry in the 70s and 80s, then people are looking at you pretty differently now. Things are being looked at head on that we were not willing to look at some time ago. Perhaps we're no longer looking away. He said bank managers, just a few years ago, bank managers were respected members of society, and the advice they were giving you was for in your own interest and all of that. How many of us think that anymore? I know we went priests, policemen, teachers. These are 3 rings of this opposition bell between Pluto and Uranus. A changing consciousness. He says it's going, wake up, to see that the world you're in is not the world you believed it to be. He said we've had 3 of those so far, we've got 4 more to come between 2015. He says, how many other revelations are we going to live through? And then he said, and there's a comet coming, Ison. Very excited about it. We can't be sure it's coming our way yet, but he said make no mistake, if a comet enters the sky, perhaps even bright enough to be seen in daylight, then it could change everything on Earth. He says the comet takes the attention of everybody. He says it doesn't matter whether people are all watching the telly, it doesn't matter that people are not watching the sky. He says the imagination of the world will be caught by a comet, it always is. And he said the effects of a comet can be to change things around on a sixpence, and their effects can ripple on for thousands of years. So we see where we are, do we not, good people? I know that here I'm giving this talk to the converted, which is a real pleasure, because it is a talk that's designed partly to get to people who aren't even on this path, and it can be, they get really spiky about some of the information, and it's really nice to have a chance to be comfortable with it. I'd just like to finish with, because as you can tell, I have a pretty energetic and prophetic view of all of this. Despite all of the stuff I'm discovering, I'm still absolutely convinced that fundamentally everything's fine. All manner of things shall be well. And I'm sure that the number of people we got here and all of the people that we meet when we're doing the work that we all do between us are signs of that. There's more of them, thousands more of them by the day. And they've been before. The Celts, the Vikings, the Yanomami and the Hopi all say our world is one of 4 physical worlds, each world existing alongside the others on a vertical plane, and forming part of the chain in the cycle of humanity's physical and spiritual existence. The Hopi story relates that all humans were originally animals but were given the gift of humanity in the 3rd world by magical beings from the stars, before climbing into this 4th world which we inhabit today. The Hopi story concludes with a message from the creator, Masao, and Masao tells how if people choose selfish and arrogant ways of life, then the motion of the earth will be pushed out of place. When the balance is tipped, so that there are more people who live selfishly than with an open heart at this moment, the end of the world shall begin and the spirit world shall arise and display its power. When this happens, a colossal wave shall ripple across the seas of the world, and it shall devastate below its watery force the inhabitants of many lands in different parts of the globe. I'm not alone in believing that this sort of thing is attracted by our own consciousness, and that avoiding it is going to involve a change in consciousness. That's what the ceremony I was talking about was about. I'm sure it's what our entire voyage of discovery was about. And I want to close with what's effectively a little bit of what's known as Taliesin's Creed. It's been rewritten by a man called John Matthews in the style of Taliesin the Bard himself, and I think it says it all about us and about the state we're in. It says, in the rock, alive, we would be hewn from it, like a dream of stone, like Merlin, our brother in the hidden place. A feather in bright air, we drift in memory's disguise, shadowy as sunlight shaped by sea. Half in, half out, we are reborn. We are in the wood, we are in the stone, we are in the sun, we are in the dancing, we are in all things. This is our freedom, this is our strength, this is our discovery, this our self. Thank you very much for your attention. This has been Ceremony, Healing and the End of the World Age, a healing history talk. That's my healing history symbol. Presented by Ben Iyer, which is what I like to be known as. That's my nickname. The artist previously known as Nick Marchmont. Frequent contact with TruthJuice has made me suspect of my corporate identity. And it's based on the work of Juliet and Jiva Carter, who did the template ceremonies. They can be found at www.thetemplateorg.com, where if you fancy getting this CD, you can get it off them. I think it's £25, but there's a lot of stuff in this box. You can come and have a look at it. There's a CD with a lot of details to look at. There's a DVD with the ceremony and several bits of really beautiful rotating geometry on them. There's a little book explaining all of the muscle testing and the background to the ceremony. Or me and Jess, we really like to go around the place doing ceremonies with people. So if you can get kind of like a dozen people together, we're happy to come for donations. One of the differences between us and the ceremony is that we work for donations because they have to make a lot more money than we do because they do a lot more travelling. We like to get what we can out of the ceremony, but by and large, if you can attract sort of a dozen or so people and convince them to pay £15 or so, that'll cover a really, really beautiful day. But if not, like I say, all the stuff is available from thetemplate.org with loads of jewellery and loads of geometry, and it's potentially a very, very expensive site to go to. I certainly couldn't stop spending money with them when I was with them. So based on the work of Juliet and Jiva Carter, and of course the revelation of the pyramids, really brilliant, really justifies in itself the existence of YouTube in my opinion. I also host a radio show on Media Streaming International Radio called Dr. Rock's Radio Show, in which I interview all manner of people. We've covered everything from badger culling through illegal mortgages to the nature of consciousness. We are seeking solutions. That is one of the aim, and my show mostly seeks solutions through looking at consciousness and looking at community and common unity. You can find podcasts of previous shows at www.tnsradio.drrock.biz, which is my website. It's called TNS Radio because MSI used to be. I'm going to have all that change, but I haven't got around to it yet.
Which is yours again? Because
mine is
could you say it to me? It's
yes,
easier.
I can. It's Dr. Dr. hyphen ROCK
ROCK, yes.
.biz. That's my website. BIZ. Yeah. And the podcast one, because there's several things there. There's a Mayan date converter. There's the healing history talks. And a podcast page. The podcast page is TNS Radio, which used to
TNS.
That's it. Used to stand for Take No Shit Radio. .com.
Radio.
TNS Radio dot, and then dr-rock.biz again. It's complicated, all of this. I really like the podcast page though, and lots of other people tell me they get a lot of enjoyment. If you go to tnsradio.drrock.biz, that will reveal, I don't know, 50 or 60 previous shows. I have to take the music out because of the copyright. Some might say that's a blessing. Some people really enjoy the Dr. Rock Radio Show music. But in the meantime, I think that's about it for me from this gig.